Welcome, one and all. It is Monday here in the U.S., and normally Liberty is our host on Monday, but she had a conflict, so I'm here standing in for her. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. As always, our first hour is general discussion of production-related questions and technology. The second hour is typically a deeper dive into a topic. And today we're going to do one of two shows this week on the kind of orbit around script writing or content creation. I've jotted down 5 things I've learned over the years on writing scripts just to kind of start the discussion. But my hope is the panel and the questions from you, our audience, our producers, improve and extend my list. So we're talking about crafting content for engagement, some basic ideas. That's our second hour today. Mitch, I think we're ready to go to our first question. So let's dive in.
Thank you, Bill. First one in from Andy Carluccio in San Francisco. What is your preferred version of NDI to use in production apps? 5.5.x is the latest, though stability updates have been required recently. 5 has been around for a year, but folks sometimes face issues with 5 they did not face with 4.
And Alex, good morning. You're here. Let's dive in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I work with a great version of NDI. It's a slight variant called STI.
I've heard of that.
I've heard of it. It works really well. It turns out that every time you plug something in, it just the video comes out the other end. So yeah, I'm afraid that I don't know. I looked across our panel today, and I'm not sure if we have any real NDI heavy folks. I think a lot of the folks here are still in the SDI HDMI version of this process. But I think that we have heard that there have been some quirks, but I have a hard time separating with NDI, new quirks versus old quirks. So that's I think that's if you ask this on another day when there's someone who's having NDI, I'm sure that they'll defend it more fervently.
Great answer. All right, so let's move on to the next question.
Johnny Estias from Manila has a question. I currently have a Mac Mini M1 with ZoomISO, ready to buy a Sonnet PCIe enclosure with a DeckLink card, and I'm undecided where to get the DeckLink Duo 2 or the Quad 2. Will I be able to get more than 4 participants with my Mac Mini M1?
And Jason's going to start us off here.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I've never done it with a quad, but I have done it with 2 Sonnet boxes. The issue that I run into is that there are so many different inputs, and of course, ZoomISO makes this easier, but that list will actually extend beyond your monitor, and you end up with so many input and or outputs because it's every single port and every single frame rate that it can be a little bit hard to track. But once you get it locked down, yeah, I'd say pretty much you'll be okay.
Alex.
Yeah, I think ZoomISO doesn't have the same problems that Zoom had with the long list, and I don't know if I haven't used it. With the cards, we've specifically only been using it with the newer ZoomISO. I would definitely get the quad. I already ordered a quad, so I have a quad arriving hopefully today or tomorrow, and so and I'm using a Mac Mini M1 with the Sonnet Express. With the quad card is the configuration that I have set up, that I'm setting up for what I'm doing. The issue is I don't know if you'll be able to fully take full advantage of the quad card out of the gate. It will do 8 outs, but there are some, maximum bandwidth limitations right now. So I don't know if you'll get full value out of the quad card at the moment, but I wouldn't buy something that couldn't keep expanding, for that. So that'd be my recommendation. And you can, as Jason said, use 2 duos as well. But then you're using up more of your, and I guess you could, I'm too superstitious to daisy chain them. so I haven't done that part yet. So I'd rather have one quad card, going out. And we've definitely used that with ZoomISO version 2.
Nice. All right. Next question.
Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia. I did a test yesterday with LinkedIn Live only to discover that the sync was off. Do I need Loopback audio hijack configuration for LinkedIn Live? Used StreamYard.
And I'm interested in this too, having suffered through some sync issues lately. John?
Yeah, I would do a local recording and see if you're having the same issue. I don't think there would be anything within StreamYard specifically that would cause a latency issue happening after the fact. It's potential that there could be a configuration thing there, but I would do a local recording and just verify that your sync was good before like doing another test.
And Alex.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'm curious what you're streaming with too. Usually, if we see something that is unusually out of sync, and I don't know whether it's a little out of sync or a lot out of sync. If something is just a little out of sync, it might be just your pipeline. So if you break that down a little bit, if you're using a software encoder, so if you're encoding out of your whatever and not encoding from a hardware encoder, you want to look at your CPU usage, because if the CPU usage goes over 70%, you may see breakup in your sync, loss of sync. So if the CPU goes over 70%, you're at risk of losing sync because it will start to prioritize.
There you go. All right, next question.
John Foltz in from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. John asked, last week Adobe announced plans to acquire Figma, a popular web prototype software. Not so long ago, it was Frame.io. Is this a good trend or a bad trend for creative software users?
Courtney's going to start us off.
Well, it's probably a good trend for us Adobe stock holders, full disclosure. But as far as the creative software users, it gives Adobe a chance to expand their platform of stuff that they can charge monthly for, so they have a broader line that they can charge for, so they can increase their subscriptions perhaps. But as far as, usability, I'm not sure because I don't use Figma. I haven't looked at it yet, so I can't comment on its usability and its usefulness in the Adobe realm.
Alex.
I think a lot of it depends on how much more Adobe starts charging monthly as they add these apps. If they keep the cap at a certain number and they just keep adding apps to it, I think over time it adds value for the users if a user is using all the Adobe suite. And the problem in the past has been a couple of us only use a handful of things, but now we're using 3 things and we see a number keep on going up in the subscription cost. And so I think that has been the problem with it. I think that the challenge with Adobe when things go into it is that, again, you lose access to as Bill's talked about in the past, you lose access to your work. And so I think that if you don't keep paying, so you literally can't open the things that you made without paying for it, which is an incredibly good business model for Adobe. But as a creator, it's problematic.
Yeah, I'm not even going to speak to the subject because it's one of my sore points. And, subscriptions, there are a lot of different kinds of subscriptions, and some of them are, while you're using somebody else's intellectual property, you're paying for it. And when you stop paying, you're not using their intellectual property anymore. I think that's fair. Others like this you put your content up on their site, and if there's any circumstance where you're not able to get to your own content, I have small problems with that, but I'm going to pass on. Mitch, you have some stuff?
Yeah, I'm sorry I popped in here at the last minute, but you said something that sort of got my attention, and that is, wouldn't it be appropriate that any work that you did while you had a subscription would continue to be usable to some degree, rather than have it disappear? That's just a recipe for disaster, to start a big project and then find out you can't come back to it a year later and do something with it if you've let the subscription lapse. I don't know how to work that, but I'm just thinking that's a big gotcha.
It is a difficult balance because I understand what they're doing, and I think it's fair if you're using their services to pay for their services. Nobody's suggesting that it be for free, but this idea of you're using an application that is remote to add value to your raw materials in such a way that you're really creating a piece of intellectual property, I'm just a little uncomfortable with that being locked into a system where if I fail to pay or something happens, the credit card, gets messed up, that theoretically they could shut your account down and then I don't have access to that construction material that I've created. That's always been my issue. Now, there are subscription types that do that well, but it's always been a sticking point for me, and everybody feels different about it. And again, we don't talk about religion here, so I'm not going to get into too much of the politics of this, but it's just something to think about in the back of your mind. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's Roscoe from Madison, Indiana, asking maybe a question for tomorrow, but does anyone know how the Queen's procession was mic'd to get such consistent sound from the band? I assume a wireless transmitter hidden somewhere in front of them.
And Alex?
In the past with some of these, I mean, sometimes we've actually mic'd almost, all the major parts of the band to pull that back in. Other things that we've done on floats have been, basically area mics, and some people, you can't really put them on the people, but you can put them on the hardware itself to try to grab that. I don't know how they did this one, but that's how we've done it in the past.
Okay, we're going to move on here. Chris Widener. Oh, I'm sorry. Next question, which is
Yep, and it is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, working on a quote for broadcasting from an old Boy Scout cabin. No power, no problem, but no internet, I guess is what he's saying there, and no Starlink due to the trees. Big problem. Thinking about renting a boom truck for height for Starlink, but not sure how to improve the truck.
And Courtney's going to start us off here.
Well, there must be some area where it's not in the shot that you can disguise the truck. And if you just put up a 100-foot boom, I don't know how tall the trees are. You might be better off if you hire a satellite truck and find a clearing nearby that's within a cable run for fiber optic cable run. That might be a better way to do it. You could hide it over the hill or on top of the hill, somewhere else, wherever there's a clearing where they can get a clear shot at a satellite. That's one solution. Otherwise, Starlink might be problematic.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about covering in those areas, first of all, you really want to go there, see if there's any cell coverage. If there is, you might be able to use something like a live view, but a lot of times you get out into the woods there and you can't. If it's near something that's populated, you might see cell towers, and then you have a potential to do something there. But the outside of that, you want to think about how to get the bandwidth to there. So where can you get, as Courtney said, a satellite truck? Where can you put the Starlink? Where can you find internet? We don't usually run, you can run single mode fiber quite a distance, but we don't usually run it over 1,000 feet, from where we need to be. But you could theoretically do it further than that. And then of course you can, as we've talked about in the past, you can do point-to-point relays that go quite a distance. We've done those over many miles, not many, but I have not personally gone over about 10 or 12 miles. But those will go over microwave fairly effectively, depending on the weather. So those are I mean, I know that, they are capable, larger ones are capable of even further. So it just depends on what you're trying to do as far as how do you get the bandwidth to it. But remember, you don't have to have it right where you're broadcasting. You just have to figure out how whether it's wireless or fiber, how you're going to get it over to the place that it might be a mixture of both. You might have somewhere that you have internet. There's a 5-mile pipe that you have to shoot it across, through space. Then there's 1,000 feet to get to where you are. And those are the kind of things. And I would definitely have that with a lot of caveats that we're doing the best we can in the middle of nowhere. But the sat truck is, by the way, in large national parks, what we've used almost every single time is a sat truck.
There you go. We are burning through the questions today. So for those of you in our producer corps, if you have questions, it'd be a very, very good day to do it. We'll move on to the next topic a little bit early if we don't get more in. But right now, it's your turn. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. Where I am currently living, the internet connection has 350 megabits down, but only 11.43 megabits up. Would 11.43 megabits be insufficient for high quality 1080 or 4K 60 frame streaming? Twitch's maximum bitrate is 6 megabits per second, but I don't know about the other services.
There are a lot of people weighing in on this. Jason's going to start us off. Jason?
Okay, the quick and dirty is that is woefully inadequate. Like just straight away across the board, like even under the most ideal circumstances, that's just not enough. I'll leave it to John to fill in the details.
John, you're up.
For 1080p, it's not a problem really. Again, 6 megabits is not a problem for that stream. When you get into 4K, there's no way you could do it, especially at 60 frames. You're pushing, probably closer to 50 megabits per second to really make it a high quality stream. A lot of people on Twitch, because of a low bit rate, will actually stream at 960p versus 1080 just to try to get a better quality of picture with what they're sending out versus just more pixels.
And Courtney.
Yeah, pretty much what John said. Yeah, 1080p should be no problem. 5 megabits you can do with a decent encoder. 1080p, 2997 or 30 or even 60. I wouldn't try and do 4K at all. It's just you're going to tax the system, and it'll handle. We're talking about a single stream up. If you're going to try and do multiple streams up, then that's another problem. But a single stream up, you should be able to do 1080p without a problem with 11 megabit.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that it would be challenging to do 1080p 60, 1080p 30 at 6 megs a second, but technically you would want twice as much bandwidth, to 12 megabits for 1080p 60. Now, some people will do it at less, but you are going to start seeing visual quality. It depends on what as always, it depends. If you're doing 60 in a high frame rate game, you may see breakup at 6 or 8 megabits per second, and which you do see in Twitch. and people may decide that it's acceptable to do that. But our math would typically be that 6 megabits per second would be great for 1080p 30, but we would want to see a higher bit rate for 1080p 60. And then you always want to have twice as much we will always request twice as much bandwidth, at least, from what we're what we actually need to make sure that there's headroom. If you're only testing at 11, it means what if someone starts downloading something? What if someone starts doing something else? So you're very, very close to the edge. Could you do a 1080p 60 stream? Yes. You would just have to be very careful with what you did there. This is where we start using things like Zixi, because Zixi will flex. The Zixi protocol will flex with the bandwidth much more effectively than most other protocols.
Nice. All right. Next question.
Aaron Giancarelli from Flagstaff, Arizona. Need a new router for the house. Any suggestions?
And Mitchell, you're going to start us off.
I like to say this word, so I'll just say it. Meraki.
Meraki routers are pretty costly, though. Are there any less expensive things, or do you just need to go to the top? Alex?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks within our group use Ubiquity. So the I think it's the Dream Machine or Dream Machine Pro. So the Ubiquity stuff has been very popular. I know a friend of mine who does a lot with the internet. In the university that he managed all the IT for, he was using Meraki, for all of that, because it was easy to manage a large fleet of things. That's what Meraki really stands out for. Less so for, I have a router for one place, is really not, Meraki, you don't see the real advantages until you start saying, well, I've got, 20 routers and I want to be able to manage them from the cloud, and I want to be able to do, know where everything is. And so I think for a house, I think that the Ubiquity is probably better. I have a smaller version of Ubiquity here. I'm going to probably move up to the Dream Machine. The problem I really had was availability. For a while it was back ordered, so I couldn't get a hold of one. But that's probably what I'm moving to.
And John Wallace.
The Palo Alto smaller firewalls are really great for use for routers. They also have a really great solution for the actual firewall portion, IPS, IDS detection. So if you're looking for something with security focus that can also do some basic routing and then pass it off to something else for as far as Wi-Fi and everything else goes, the Palo Alto firewalls are some of my favorite to use. You can get lab grade, and then the licensing cost is cheaper, as well as everything else. And then you could start skilling up on a different skill set.
Some great answers there. Hopefully that took care of you, Aaron. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is in, and he has a question for audio and XR Unity Unreal Engine work with some editing and resolve. Would the M1 Ultra Max Studio bring a significant performance advantage over the M1 Max?
And nobody has weighed in on this. I'm a little surprised, but I am just astonished at how fast. I mean, we're thinking that off-the-shelf consumer computers now are so much faster than anything I was able to afford a decade ago that it's almost amazing. Alex, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, we'd have to test it. I mean, most of us that got a couple of us got Ultras. I actually got the Max. I did not get the Ultra, and so I think that I would not do Unreal development on a Mac. Like it's just not it's not optimized at all. It's buggy. I wouldn't do that. It's just a waste of time. As far as Unity goes, I just don't think it's been optimized for the M1, and so I think that you might see some performance jumps just going to that machine, but I would be very surprised if you saw any significant performance changes between the Max and the Ultra.
Jason.
Yeah, I have an Ultra, and I have a friend who basically decided a long time ago that all speed tests were null and void, and what mattered was how quickly could it mine Bitcoin. And I tried to explain to him It's not optimized. Like this is a false choice, and I would say that Unity and Unreal are very similar in that way. That it is just not designed for the platform. Doesn't matter if it's just kind of been falsely put over there. It's a bad comparison.
Okay, there's some wisdom for you on the question. Let's move on to the next one.
Vic Hernandez from Springfield, Missouri. As an industry outsider, I've been very impressed with the theatrical production value of the Rings of Power. What are your thoughts?
Courtney.
Well, I've only seen the first episode, so I can only comment on that. It's very bright, very sunny, very colorful. I'm not sure where they shot it, in New Zealand, perhaps, because it has a lot of that topography. But these days, you never know if it's, stock footage or rendered 3D, landscapes. But it looks nice. It's a little bit of a throwback. There's a lot of diffusion, but the makeup holds up well in 4K. I generally thought it was pretty well pulled off.
And Mitchell.
Whole lot of elves. They're all over the place.
It's interesting to know what you make, Courtney, about the makeup, because I remember my wife was on local television kind of during the transition between SD and HD in the early days. And she was talking to the makeup artists, and they all just went nuts. They suddenly realized when HD cameras started going on and these television station personnel who had been doing one thing for decades had to face what the result of makeup on high definition, all immediately panicked and had to go spend a lot of time and effort. So I wouldn't have thought to look at that specifically, but I'm glad you did. And it's an interesting thing. Alex has some thoughts too.
Yeah, we're talking about the new Lord of the Rings, right? I'm pretty sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, so, I believe, yes,
there was a Rings of
program.
Power in 1991, but this is the new one in 2020.
Yeah, so I've been watching it, and I just want to make sure I'm on the same page, because it was like, so I think, the graphics, everything else have been stunning. It's been an incredible, and there's definitely nothing that's good. It's all built, they spent all the money on these episodes. I can't remember, the number I heard was over $500 million on the first season. So you can definitely, see the money being spent. I can see the money being spent. Really, really good digital sets, really excellent. I'm hoping to see more and more behind the scenes so that we can really see what happened there. But I would assume that a lot of those are pretty large digital sets and some physical sets. I think that they've done a really good job. I'm not gripped by the story as much as I thought I would be or hoped that I would be. I do enjoy it, and I'm going to watch it. I'm kind of I enjoy Lord of the Rings, and so I'll watch it. But I felt like there are a lot of scenes that there's a lot of it doesn't feel like Lord of the Rings to me. I think that's the issue. It doesn't feel as grand, and I don't mean that by the effects. I mean by the it's not as their situation doesn't seem as important. Like for some reason, Lord of the Rings had a weight to it, an importance of, and this one doesn't feel that way right now. I think they're trying to, but it just doesn't have that feel. But as far as the effects and the digital sets and everything else, it's amazingly good.
Courtney.
And I just checked. Season 1 was shot in New Zealand. Season 2, they moved it back to England. So they'll probably be using a lot of stock backgrounds from Season 1 and Season 2, which is a great TV trick that they always do.
It's been such a juggernaut for such a long time. It has such a huge fan base globally that I'm not at all surprised, as Alex meant, that they're spending all the money. Although it's interesting, the Sandman thing that was just on HBO, Apple, I can't remember. Netflix. Thank you, Jason. They spent a ton of money on that too, and I guess it's performed really well, but there's still some question about whether or not they're going to get a season 2. So I think the economics and the process of these big kind of tentpole things really is in a little question right now. I'm glad to see that some of them are proceeding, and again, with the fan base the size of the Lord of the Rings fan base, I'm not surprised that they can just get a green light and spend whatever they need to make it, because it's going to last for generations. But it seems like there's a downturn in the industry, and we may not get as much original content, new franchises starting up, and that would be sad. If there's a way to get more content that is good, I think everybody should pursue that. Mitchell, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting you're mentioning what shows are probably going to be up for renewed second seasons and so on. I was very happy because I thought it was done to see Grand Tour come back on Prime this season. I just love those guys, and they still continue to amaze and make me laugh.
Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons. I was surprised that there was question. I guess Ted Lasso, which is one of the Apple gigantic hits and has a huge following and won a lot of Emmys and things like that. They said 3 seasons, that's it, we're stopping. And I know a lot of people are disappointed in that. And it's just interesting to see that in the old days of broadcast television, if you had a hit at that scale, they would throw any kind of money at it they possibly could to get it to keep going. And sometimes with good results, sometimes maybe with not. You had too many seasons of some shows. But it's interesting, the changing dynamics of content creation. I just find this fascinating. But that pretty much takes care of that. Let's move on. Next question.
From Ray Harwood in Avondale, Arizona. Ray asks, Zoom release notes for September 18th indicate a new feature, enable sign language and interpretation. Zoom customer service tells me it's not available to pro or basic accounts. Shouldn't this accessibility enhancement be enabled for all accounts?
David.
Yeah, so we actually saw this on the test kitchen. Oh, sorry, that's not working. We saw this on the test kitchen last week, and it looked really exciting. I can confirm that it does not seem to be available in my pro account, which is a real shame. I agree with you 100%. This should be available for all accounts. But I'm looking forward to it. I will say that they have it listed under web features, new and enhanced features under release notes for the web, and it's not specific to a particular client. So I'm not sure what that tells us.
Interesting. Alex, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I don't actually know what the limitation is for this specifically. I just saw that it came out, but I haven't had time to test it. The one thing that I will say is that a lot of times companies have to decide who's the most likely user that's actually going to use this and what is the cost of support on a wider market. So I don't know what Zoom's making those decisions or how they're approaching those things. But what I would lean towards is like making it available to absolutely everyone means you have a lot of people trying to use it that aren't really set up for it or trying to use it for something else. And what you end up with is a lot of, you just end up with a lot of tickets, from people who aren't really doing it. So by limiting it to a certain height, it just means that you have people who do ASL, like that is, and understand how to use it, and they understand what the limitations are. Otherwise, it can definitely drown tech support or a team to have a lot of, I hate to put it this way, but a lot of yahoos using your hardware, like when it's free and it's easy, then everyone starts using it and they go, well, it doesn't work this way. And it's not built to work that way. Like it wasn't like it was designed, these kinds of things are built to work a certain way. And the people who know how to use them. But you can easily, I've seen companies open this gate wide open, and then they end up with just a lot of people who've never done ASL or never done these things, or not ASL specifically, but languages and interpretation and captioning. And they come up with all these quirky complaints because they've never done it before, and they think that should be possible. And maybe it should, but it especially when you roll something out at the beginning, you roll it out at the top, you get it working with professionals, and then you slowly go down and make it available to more people. But it's the easiest way to test it is to work with the folks that have already done it a lot and already know how to use it. And it's probably a partnership with folks that already know how to do this. And so I think that it doesn't mean it won't be available to everyone at first, but it's definitely a dangerous thing to do at first to make it available to everyone.
All of what you just said resonates with me tremendously. I mean, the change when the Americans with Disabilities Act made captioning a requirement for TV, I had never had to deal with it before, and suddenly it became more and more a request from clients, and it pushed me to learn it. But in the early days, it was much more difficult than it is now. So I'm wondering if that arc is going to happen with this ASL sign language interpretation. And let's keep our fingers crossed. Courtney, you had thoughts?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I haven't seen this service being used. Maybe David can fill us in on this. Do they use live ASL signing translators, or do they use some type of avatar and AI to generate a close facsimile of ASL?
David?
No, it's for a live person. You can, according to the notes, you can assign someone to be a sign language interpreter.
But
interesting.
They don't provide that person for you?
Not that I could see.
So you have to contract with the signer to be able to be in an inset in your program, and they're responsible for the content translation and the rest of that. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. Anything that makes content more accessible to more people, always a good thing. Next question, please.
From Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. Talking Zoom subscriptions, I haven't had my own as I've always used clients. What do you suggest as the minimum for ZoomISO with HD settings, etc.? Pro or business?
Alex is going to start us off.
Yeah, I would go to business to start with. Remember, pro to start with. Business requires a minimum of 10 licenses. So if you go to business, if you go to the pro account and you set a ticket, you can get 720p immediately. You will not generally get 1080p for 1080p until you have a business account and a good reason for it. So that's the math there. You can't just go to a business account. Remember, that business account's going to cost you a couple $100 a month. But if you do want 1080p and you have a good reason, you'll need to get to a business account, and then you'll need to then start working through the ticket. And it took a couple months for us to get to 1080p the first time. But you can get to 720p with any pro account and a ticket. I mean, they'll pop you right up.
Mitchell.
I've been actually offered a business account with 5 as a commitment, but it was a temporary offer, so I don't know if that'll come up again. But be on the lookout.
Interesting. All right. Next question.
From Keenan Campbell in Nevada. If you were building a live stream setup in a flyaway case, what is the panel's minimum maximum requirements for IOs, network, fiber, etc.?
And nobody has weighed in on this yet, so this may be... Oh, there we go. Alex is going to help us out. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would say, I would definitely say that depends. It's a pretty wide open, the flyaway kit that we just installed yesterday in a facility, I mean, just for a couple of days of work, was 22 cases. So that was our flyaway kit. Yeah, so it was 22 cases that showed up to make that work. So you have to decide, and that's not what I would consider even a complicated production. It's a pretty straightforward production to do. So, but that has the cameras and the tripods and the lenses but it also has the core. The core is probably 8 cases to make that happen. And so I think that you have to kind of think about, what do you want it to do? I'm building a kit that will probably fit into almost a 1510. So it can go. I'm trying to build one that I could do a reasonably good show with all carry-on. So it's just like a personal little project that I'm working on. So those are all, that's the range, but you have to decide, what are the specs, what are the minimum specs? Do you want comms? How complicated is the audio? How complicated, is this for, how many people? Those types of things.
John Wallace.
For me, I always prefer SDI. I always make sure that I have a media converter. So if I need to use fiber or Ethernet, I can handle that. Those are some simple things I would make sure to include. If you can include a switch that has both, and then you can just bring some modules with you, that can get you connectivity either way, what you're being provided. Those are just my thoughts on some connectivity options.
Jason?
If you actually mean a single flyaway case, some of the best and most versatile coverage that I've seen on the topic is from our own Here to Record. Truly, just guy has done just about everything you can imagine. John Barker is his name. Took me a second, but yeah, check out Here to Record.
That's very cool. Whenever I think about something like that, I'm always thinking to myself, am I going to go and be able to ask for a banquet table? Is this is this production gear for infrastructure? Or am I going on a golf course out there? And so for me, I love the what are collapsible things that I can make it truly self-contained. Alex, when you address these, how in your imaginary one, how deep are you going? Do you want it to be able to do that, go out in the middle of nowhere and broadcast, or?
It depends on the location and what we send. So, for a lot of locations, we bring our own foldable tables, because I'm a little specific about the tables. And we also bring our own chairs, because I have to have people sit there for 12 hours. And so for a large, like an event, like we're not doing Dreamforce this year, but for a Dreamforce, we would bring our own very specific wooden tables. They're 6 feet long. They're wooden tables, folding, not in the center. We put loops on them so that we can run string lights along the outer edges of the tables, because then we can turn those on and it's just a soft light. You can see what's going on behind stage without it affecting anything. And then we have our own set of chairs that we roll in together as a big, 15 chairs going in, but we'll show up in a truck. And of course you start paying attention to is the truck dock height, or, so a lot of times when we're loading into a large facility, we were very specific that we want a dock height truck with a lift so that we can get it, set up and get everything in there. And when we're doing those types of things, we'd really try to move to road cases, because road cases are going to be a lot easier for us to move around. We used to build really high road cases. We have a tendency now to limit them to about 52 inches because that's what it takes to put them on a plane. So if we need to fly them, in rocket or something else, we want to make sure that all of our systems are capable of that. But then, it's a little bit more flexible sometimes to build the road cases. The one we just built for a fly kit uses the SKB. They're the fly kit. I think it's the ones that the racks pull out of the cases. And so those are the ones that we moved to for this one for more flexibility of where you can load in. But you have to pay attention to a lot of things, like on the place that we loaded in yesterday, we had someone go through and walk from the door all the way up to where we have to put it and make sure that there's no bumps. Like there's no, literally 4 inches can delay you by 4 hours if you have a lot of gear coming through on cases. It can be a big deal to have a high jump somewhere, and so you want to see that it's flat all the way through. So you have to pay attention to a lot of those things when you're making those requests. But it depends on the space. Some of them can provide the tables. Sometimes we buy the tables and leave them. Sometimes we buy the tables and take them back. Sometimes we those are in a production that is more than $10,000. Sometimes we, buying a $150 table is just considered an expendable. So it just depends on what we're doing. We try to avoid, we can't always avoid foldable tables that fold in the center, or plastic tables, because we can't attach our monitors to the table and other things to them very effectively. Things slide around a little bit and they don't handle as much weight. I think that, for us, for instance, we have to make our kit that we want to set on the tables is 200 pounds. And so, or just short of it. So we need to know that the table can handle 300. Those are the kind of things you have to kind of pay attention to. There's just a lot of little logistics when you start to do that.
So much. I remember the first time I saw one of the road cases where the lid came off and became the work surface, had a set of legs inside. Not the best solution, but if you're just trying to be, as convenient as you can.
That's super useful, actually. Yeah, a lot of times both sides will be tables. If not one side or both sides are tables. Even if we don't use them, we can set them down somewhere. But if we need them, we can put them out. It also means that when you're shipping something away, like one of our event kits that we built for another company, definitely we actually drill certain taps into those cases so that the monitors just slide into the holes, that are, and so we've kind of machined, the stuff that's going to hold the monitors. And so you can just slide them in. And the setup time for a pretty full featured event with PTZs is about 45 minutes, and so you spend a lot of time in the shop building things, wiring them, naming them, everything else to shorten your load in time. That's because you get it compressed and things get hard.
Absolutely. That's why part of the fun of live production is getting all these things right over the course of time. It's fascinating business.
I wouldn't call it fun. I think I would call it what's required.
I guess the word is satisfying. When you've got something and it works and you go out on location and everything fits together and you're ready in a half hour instead of 3 hours.
I'd call it just a job. After years of not traveling and not loading in, I have to admit I bristle at it pretty much a lot. I'm just like, how do we get this all somewhere more manageable?
Maybe I'm just feeling nostalgic for my early days when
I'm back in it.
Fun.
I'm back in it, so I don't. There's no nostalgia. It's just like, oh, okay.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, it's just my job to read them, too. This is from Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. Alex has spoken about failure being the ultimate cost for a brand when doing an event. Can you share any tips for how you educate clients who don't prioritize the tech needed?
And Alex is going to weigh in on this, too. Alex?
It's really hard. Usually people come to us after something failed and they're looking for something that's more more stable. So usually that's where I get clients is, and you have to know that you're only as good as your next failure, because as soon as you fail, the clients go into it. You fail like twice, you can usually get away with it once if it's not major, but any kind of major failure, you're now at risk of losing the client. And so you have to be very careful. And you have to remember that with success and failure, it's also how it feels when you're doing the show. So is it a stressful thing for the client? You may pull off every frame looks great in the live show, but getting there was a disaster. And, you can do that every once in a while, but clients won't put up with it for very long. They'll be looking for someone that gives them a little. I learned this early on as I lost a client. We were just very scrappy. We produced great work. It looked great, but it wasn't, the creature comforts for the client weren't as good as what we were producing, it just wasn't great. It wasn't, I didn't spend money on walls. I didn't put a bar in. I didn't, have receptionists. It was just a very much more like we spend all the money on the end product. The client ended up leaving us for a company that charged them 3 times as much. And when you went to them, they had a beautiful bar, and they had this awesome lobby, and they had, a couple receptionists, and they had, all this other stuff. And they had like a really nice conference room and a place that you could do phone calls, and they could do, and the client, for the client who was working at that company, it was a growing company. It's not their money. Why would they work somewhere that is saving them money? But, it's not. If it's a big corporation, it's just uncomfortable for them. And so we definitely started, that was a lesson for me on that I might want to add some more of those creature comforts in and make it a little less scrappy to attract clients that were looking for that.
Evolve or perish, I guess. So next question.
David Paskin from Miami, Florida, here on the panel. David asked, apparently for the 1/2 hour that I wasn't on Zoom last week, it went down. When Zoom is down, what do you do?
David, are you presuming that you are keeping the internet up solely?
No, not at all. But I'm asking both.
You left and it went down, though. Maybe there's causal.
No, that's not what I was. I wasn't suggesting that. No, but I mean, I'm not asking, do you go take a walk? I'm asking, I mean, if you've got something coming up, where do you switch to? What do you do?
Alex, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting to a point where there's not a really good replacement for Zoom. That's the problem is that, I mean, in the past, we used Google once for office hours when Zoom had this is like over 2.5 years ago, in the early days of office hours, we all had to run over on a Sunday morning, I think, and get over there and get into meet, which was not a great experience for us. And so I think that, at this point, a lot of times this is where it's important if you're doing production is to have a rider that says we can't control everything, like we can't, and there are things that are out of our control. And so putting those kind of things in there, this is not like a broadcast where we could just do something else. If you're fully taking advantage of Zoom, it's just you could stream it. If you were just using Zoom to stream, you could also look at some WebRTC solution. So it's you plus 3 or 4 people. Could you use OBS Ninja? Could you use, other things to tie that together? So it really depends on whether you're just using it as a broadcast unit or whether you're actually building a meeting. If you're building a meeting, it would be very hard to do it some other place. I mean, you could do it in Meet, you could do it in Teams. The login procedures for Teams makes it almost unusable. Teams is really good if you're a company doing it all the time and it's built into your 365. It's kind of a nightmare for anybody outside of that group. So there's event processes for WebEx, there's event processes so you'd have to figure those out. I have to admit that I don't know how, the problem really is from our production pipeline. I don't know really at the rate that Zoom's broadcast solutions are moving. I don't know how many viable, solutions there would be. Another one that I would probably look at is Stream Voodoo. So Stream Voodoo could, you could probably put together something which produces a lot of great It can actually do higher resolution and higher frame rate than Zoom can, but it's a little harder to onboard people. So if I was doing production, I could do something like that. But if I was doing a meeting, I don't think I could, use it for that. So those are some of the other ones that I would. I think probably StreamVoodoo would be the first one that I would do if I was just trying to put together a small discussion. I'd probably shift to that over Zoom. If Zoom was down, But I think that again with ZoomISO, it becomes more and more complicated for us to do those things.
I've always admired how good Zoom was when they had to face that move from a couple of million subscribers to 10x that. The fact that they managed to navigate that crossover, I mean, that's just insane for any company to have to face. I have 2 million customers today, and I have 200 million customers 2 weeks from there, a month from there. That kind of scaling is just not easy. So, and they managed it. So that says something about their back-end operation, if nothing else does. Let's move on to the next question.
From Muddy Schlegel in Raleigh, North Carolina, why is it important to use headphones versus open speakers? And how would you convince a client to try in-ear monitors?
Jason's going to start us out. Jason?
I think of this kind of like an AOL email address, right? The people that still have an AOL email address in 2022, Bill's cracking up. It's basically, there's almost nothing you can say to convince them. So I would say, yeah, you could talk about the noise canceling and the benefits and the drawbacks, but really the difference is give them 10 seconds of a demo, give them 30 seconds, and then try it with a live demo. And if that's not good enough, have fun. You've got mail.
There you go, Mitchell.
If you have an open mic and a live speaker somewhere, you got problems somewhere down the line. And even if it's okay right now, it's not going to be down the way, because I just remember many situations where I'm trying to figure out where that echo's coming from, or I'm hearing comms leaking into the broadcast. It's just an open mic. So it's just best not to have it in the first place, and then you don't have to worry about that happening. As to in-ear monitors, if it's a client's first time with them, they're not going to like them. Nobody likes them the first time around. So you need to put headphones on them.
Courtney.
Well, I guess you could convince them that, Zoom does pretty good echo cancellation, but it has a harder time if that echo is coming through speakers and back through a microphone. If it's getting it just through the USB connection, it has a clean feed that it can negate and make sure that it doesn't feed back down the input. And so what happens is with an in-ear monitor, convince the client that they can have a full duplex conversation, kind of like a telephone where you're holding the earpiece to your ear and the microphone is separate. That way you can interrupt somebody, or they can interrupt you, or you can two people could talk at the same time without one upstaging the other. If you get into echo cancellation through a speaker, a lot of times it just turns into simplex. In other words, when they're talking, you can't talk, and when you're talking, they can't talk. So convince them that it's the conversation will go a lot better if they have an in-ear monitor. That way there's less of a chance of parts of speech being clipped by the echo cancellation.
David Paskin.
In some ways, Zoom has caused this problem because they've done such a good job with their echo cancellation that normal people don't see a need to worry about earphones or in-ear monitors. For those of us who have more complex audio routing or multiple sources of audio, then it becomes even more important. But it is difficult to convince those normal folks who just use Zoom why it's so important, because again, Zoom has done really a very, very good job of it.
I think this is also a generational thing a little bit. Most of us here on the panel came up during the times when we were learning about microphones, and maybe we're on stage in high school or something like that, and there were speakers behind us, and we got that awful feedback circumstance, and you just get, almost instinctively, I have to be careful with my levels, and I have to be careful with my speakers, or I will get this horrible thing to happen. We carry that into the modern era, and we just know, oh yeah, it's always better not to have an open speaker and an open microphone next to each other, no matter what the circumstances are. So IFBs achieve that for us. That means in this room, the sound of my microphone is not being heard by anything else other than where I want it to go in the Zoom meeting. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us we don't notice it. People don't notice what's happening, but you can notice it in a broadcast when you're putting it in front of a lot of people when it matters, is the lack of full duplex. So what happens is someone starts talking and you hear somebody else go down automatically, so it'll actually affect everybody's experience if everybody isn't in a headphone, so it's one of those things that we learned with Hangouts is we got everybody to put headphones on. We would have a much cleaner, more fluid and more enjoyable experience than what we would have if we opened up a speaker. It's not that you can't do it. And again, it's just a matter of really, this is the new coat and jacket. Zoom is the new coat and jacket, and you just got to decide how nice. You're talking oftentimes to people who spend a lot of money on their coat and jacket, so this is just the next investment.
Absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, what do you think of professional grade routers with Wi-Fi access points built in? The Cisco ISR 1130 series has a Wi-Fi 6 access point, but I'm concerned about being left behind with the Wi-Fi 6E coming very quickly.
And John's going to start us off.
I don't think you should really worry about Wi-Fi 6E, especially within a production environment, unless you're using it for some short range dedicated like backhaul. A lot of devices don't support 6E. I don't see a lot of devices that are going to pick it up. Wi-Fi 7 is coming very quickly down the path, and really you can't get any range out of 6 gigahertz. And once you have obstructions, it's even shorter. So you're talking 15 meters where you can take advantage of that. As far as built-in routers, access points, they can be okay, but purpose-built is going to be a lot better for you.
And John Preto.
Mr. Wallace, you just killed it. Yeah, Wi-Fi 7 spec is already done and ratified. None of the iOS devices support 6E yet, so 7 is right around the corner. And the 6 gigahertz range is very tricky, as John said.
And Jason Beish.
I'll try to answer the more direct question, which is, why is it that professional grade routers don't typically come with Wi-Fi? And the answer is, it might be a little bit more convenient for you, but oh boy, is that a security problem. Like once you have a router configured, you don't want it to be accessible by default by an SSID that just may or may not, if you flip a bit in the wrong way, turn on. So, yeah, convenient for you, but I really wouldn't worry about it.
Mitchell.
I have socks that are older than most Wi-Fi specs as they're announced. They just come and go. So I wouldn't worry about it because there's going to be another thing down the road, even if you go to the next greatest.
Okay. Next question.
Colin Mulcahy from Dublin, Ireland. Anyone using DrayTek routers and switches?
I don't see anybody who's listed here, so you may be going to zero out this one. Sorry about that. I mean, normally somebody here on the panel can handle almost anything, but it looks like nobody has experience specifically with those routers. So the normal procedure is to say, hold on to your thought, come back when there's a different panel here, because we have different arrangements of people every day, and you may find somebody who has specific experience with that router and can help you out. So sorry we're missing on you today, Colin, but definitely come back and we'll see if we can hit it another day. Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Any experience and recommendations for overhead camera rigs for live streaming setups into an ATEM camera, etc.? Thinking about this both for home office and insert studio setups.
Mitchell Hill.
We love that live 360 link, and it will operate upside down. It's small, unobtrusive, and inexpensive.
There you go, Alex.
Yeah, the problem with the link, of course, is that it doesn't go into the ATEM because it doesn't have an HDMI output. So, one of the other things to look at is the Huddle Cam. The Huddle Cam will give you controls. It does both web and HDMI out. The one that I've used the most until I sent them to somebody else that's in office hours is the little Blackmagic. The Blackmagic Micros have been really nice that I can just kind of mount them somewhere. They don't have a lot of weight. And they take some Micro Four Thirds from Panasonic that will let you control zoom and focus. So being able to zoom in on something and focus on it was pretty useful while I was using those. So those are getting motorized pieces. Now those are the small versions of that. Of course, you can put other cameras up there, but you really want to think about how am I going to control zoom in focus. You can also get regular lenses for that, for say a 6K or 4K, and you put little motors on them. So there's a lot of different companies that build those motors, from Red Rock Micro and Terenex and lots of other folks that will do that. So you can put motors on them so that you can control them, but you really do want to have control over that. And then of course, like on the production side of what we do, we often use things like either PTZs, like the one that we've used the most are the BRC 900s and 1000s. We are looking at the FR7 next for us. We're hoping to get a test unit in sometime in the future to look at that. And then the bigger versions, when you go to a conference, when you see something like Dreamforce, which is happening this week, or Google or whatever, those are telemetrics heads with full broadcast cameras attached to them with full lens control coming out of the telemetrics head with a full controller. And you might have and so there oftentimes is 3 to 6 of them on a big conference that are hanging. If you look up at like Google I/O or something like that, you'll see these big cameras, full broadcast cameras, just hanging from the truss off of these telemetrics heads, and that's what we've used for that type of thing.
Jason, quick thought.
Yeah, +1 on the Micro Studio 4K. It's one of the most useful cameras. Little caveat there, though, there's no screen. So you actually need to plug in a screen in order to do something like change the camera number. And that can be a little bit inconvenient. But again, if you're going to set it once and then put it up over your head, I think they're great.
So we've got a few questions here, and we're getting close to the end, so we're going to keep things quick now on. Let's go to the next question.
Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. Audio and ATEMs, not minis. Do you route the audio mix into the ATEM or bypass and use an embedder before encoder? I've had challenges with lower levels directly into ATEM, looking at using Terenex AV to embed before encoder.
So we got 3 people in the queue. Let's see if we can keep it at 20 or 30 seconds. Jason, you're starting.
I tend to go directly into a camera with dual XLR, and it's usually the camera that is, if not my main camera, a camera that has both SDI, so that I've got camera control and it's as synced as it can be. It's going to depend a fair bit on which specific ATEM you're talking about, but yeah, I've had good luck with that.
Mitchell, real quick.
I'm with Jason. I go audio direct into my FX3, and then it goes into HDMI on my Mini Extreme. I would not use the Mini Extreme mic inputs, either for line or mics. It's just ginchy.
Courtney?
Well, on the older ones, you had XLR inputs on the HD, the non-minis. You had the Constellation now takes, I think it has TRS inputs, balanced input, but you go through a mixer and then go into the ATEM that way. I would go into the ATEM because that way it's embedded and it has, there's lots of SDI outputs that do mix minus, which it can only generate and can only handle if it has the audio inside the ATEM rather than being routed separately. And you'll also be able to handle input delay and so on in the internal mixer and the ATEM. So if you're using a Constellation, I'd go through the Constellation's audio unless you're tied to Dante, which of course it wouldn't support unless you're using a Dante card in your mixer before going into the Constellation.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question in from Douglas Carmichael. John, you mentioned Palo Alto firewalls. What advantages do they offer over the big twos, Cisco Juniper firewalls?
John?
I just really prefer the UI. I prefer how they handle the next-gen features when it comes to layer 7 inspection. Their VPN appliance is built right into it, which is also really great, nice advantage. The interface doesn't actually change from model to model. So if you buy their smallest 200 series versus like their rack-mounted, you get the entire experience across the same. You can get a single pane of glass where you can see everything and manage multiple firewalls. It's just been something that we've grown from the Cisco line to the Palo Alto, and it's made a big difference for us.
So we're going to keep going a little bit over the top of the hour here, but next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Do you see the Brand Vaddio used in your production environments for PTZ? They have been around for years, innovative, but other brands seem to be more in the spotlight of users. Comments?
I don't use any pan tilt. I know some of the people here have on occasion, but I don't see any hands raises. So this may be another question that would be better off at another time. Let's move to another question, please.
Douglas Carmichael, would the Huddle Cam HD Pro into an ATEM Mini be a cost-effective entry-level camera for use with both Zoom and streaming services?
John Wallace.
Yeah, I see decent quality coming out of a Huddle Cam. That's definitely a cost-affordable way to get into it. But again, like you can get a Sony A5100 for, I think, even cheaper than a Huddle Cam with a kit lens, and you're going to look even better, much larger sensor.
Excellent. Next question.
Rashid Trivedi from Daytona Beach, Florida, and here on our panel. Anybody anticipating watching the upcoming Apple TV series Shantaram? I think that's how you pronounce it. It's based on a novel by Gregory David Roberts.
Jason's going to help us. Jason, do you know about that?
Yeah, I saw the preview when I was watching C this weekend, and yeah, I'll give it a shot. Maybe 2 shots, and that's it.
What genre is it in? Is it sci-fi or
it's
drama?
Espionage, I think.
Espionage. Okay, so a thriller kind of a thing. Cool. Well, let's hope it's real good. Let's move on to the next question.
David Paskin, Miami, Florida, and here on the panel. We steer clear of politics and religion here in office hours, wondering why we don't want to show the world how to have deep, meaningful, and respectful conversations on those topics.
I'm happy David Paskin's going to weigh in on this.
Well, I'm only weighing in because this is I've hit a milestone. I've never had 4 negatives on a question that I've asked. So I just want to thank everyone for hating on this question, and we can go ahead and skip it.
No, I don't think we should skip it. But, I think, and I don't want to speak for Alex, I'm going to speak for myself. I do notice that the energy created by some of these debates can just very easily get out of hand. And once it gets out of hand, it's very hard to pull people back. In my personal life, I have just increasingly had difficulty with this. And so I'm kind of on Alex's side. I don't think this is the place for it. But let's have a couple people make other comments real quick, and then we'll move on. I don't think it's wrong to bring it up, David. Jason?
Yeah, it's certainly not wrong to bring up. I think one of the designs from day one of office hours has been that there's more that unites us than divides us, and allowing the pry bar of things that divide us to be entertained is simply a way to kind of cause poise to derision and acrimony and just kind of disassemble the thing that really is the mandate of office hours, which is everybody feeling welcome.
John Wallace?
I think we got to go back to our purpose. We're here to have a global conversation. That's a very micro conversation about small things. What we're talking about is technology, how to impact people, how to have relationships that you can lead to those deeper conversations. Those things can happen one-on-one because of the relationships that you have.
And I want to point out the last part of Alex's billboard up there is where no one is left behind. So we've always said this is going to be an inclusive conversation, and anything that causes people to feel uncomfortable about coming to it is against brand. David?
Yeah, I would just offer that I would love to find a place where we can have a global conversation, build relationships with people around topics that are perhaps more challenging and uncomfortable, and do so, and this is going to sound silly, and do so with good quality video and good quality audio. I think that those things matter even in those big conversations. So I would love to see that happen somewhere.
I agree with you. I'm going to move on, but hopefully as office hours continues to expand, there will be room for shows. So maybe propose that, and maybe there's a way to help that happen. I mean, that is this show. That doesn't mean there can't be other shows that do different things. So let's move on to the next question.
Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. Is there any benefit in sending a client a 1080 webcam for a Zoom interview if only able to Zoom ISO 720? If so, any camera recommendations?
Jason?
Yes, the short answer is absolutely. Assuming that the computer is powerful enough to take lots of dots and make better dots. And that's a bit of a caveat, but yeah, I'd say a C920 or a Brio will absolutely do better, assuming you've got a processor that can take a lot of dots and make fewer.
Courtney?
Yeah, what Jason said. Here come the sirens. What Jason said, Obviously, a 1080 camera is going to have a better lens probably to deliver that 1080 image than a 720 camera. They tend to cheap out on the lenses on the lower resolution chipsets on cameras. So, yeah, even though you're only transmitting in 720, you may have a better lens. You may have a focusable lens. It may do autofocus if it's a 1080p versus a 720. Most of the 720 are just there just to give you an image, and they're built into laptops, and they're not really very good. They're not. They're fixed focal length lenses and pretty cheap plastic in those lenses.
Point taken. Next question. Second
last question for the first hour.
Last one, yeah.
Douglas Carmichael. John, do Palo Alto firewalls require a support contract for software updates?
And John? Yes.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes. Oh, good. We got that one taken care of. Yeah. So excellent. All right. We're going to switch our focus now. We're moving on to the second hour panel discussion. And it's been a little goofy behind the scenes trying to figure out what we're doing when now. But today, one of the ideas that I tossed up that everybody that I was working with in the back end said would be worthy of taking a shot is the one we're going to do today. We're talking about crafting and content for engagement and just really basic ideas. It doesn't have to be tremendously complicated, but when you sit down to write anything, that is a challenge. And in fact, past public speaking, I think crafting anything for public consumption causes a lot of fear in people. And if you can get some basic kind of rules of the road behind you before you start to do this, if you need to write or create stuff, it makes it easier. At least I've found that over the course of my career. And what I decided to frame this as for today is I thought about it for a little bit, and I came up with 5 kind of overall things that have helped me, or that how my thinking has evolved over the course of time as a content creator. I think I mentioned here before that I spent about 10 years writing an article for Video Maker magazine about production related topics. And so every month, literally for 10 years, I had to sit down and come up with a new article. Sometimes things were assigned, but most of the time I just had to come up with them. And as I evolved my process of saying, how am I going to create content? There were some rules, maybe not rules. There were some helpful aspects of looking at how to sit down at a blank page and come up with something. So I want to talk through, and I've created 5 kind of common, I call them 5 common script construction flaws. And I'm going to go through them. I'm not going to throw them all up at once because I really want to talk about them a little bit. And that doesn't mean we're just talking about these things. We're talking about a lot of things, but first and foremost, the thing that always messed me up most whenever I sat down to write anything was not having thought about who my audience was going to be for this piece of content. And if I don't know who the audience is, I have nowhere to start because I don't know what their expectations are. I don't know what their level of sophistication is. I don't know what they are looking for. And I've found in everything that I've ever written, and every time I've been on stage to do a presentation or something like that, the most fundamental thing for me is having some clue about who it is on the other side of this content, who's going to be consuming it, and what they want. You do have to figure out what you want to tell them. But if you're telling them something they don't want to hear, they're going to get up and leave. Or if you're telling them something that just is completely off target for their expectations, they're going to leave. So that's the first thing. So has anybody else on the panel run into these kind of things where you've had to put something together and you've just said, I'm not sure I want to, this audience is going to take it in. Okay, maybe not. So maybe I'll pop into some of these other ideas, and then maybe the questions that we have coming up will illuminate more. In fact, let's just go to the first question now. Courtney, go ahead and read it. Oh, Mitch, yeah. Mitch is away for a moment.
Okay. Let's see. It's from Morgan Price in British Columbia. It says, what technique, how do you structure a live session to maintain engagement? In narrative radio, like This American Life, they talk about 90-second beats. How do you think live production beats how long live production beats should be?
Well, it's an interesting topic. So most writers have structural shortcuts they use. I know I always had a list of simple rules that I had, that helped me get into each of the topics I did over those 10 years of writing things. And a 90-second beat, some sort of a clock timing thing helps you understand you don't have to do too much or too little. Similar to that, I used to write a lot of radio scripts, and we knew that we were selling time in 30-second or 60-second increments. And there was a formula for that. A 30-second script generally was about 85 words. A 60-second script was about 160. So I knew where I was targeting the number of words I was writing so that I fulfilled that objective. So in the same way, when they're looking at 90-second beats, it helps them not just go on and on and on and not get to the point. It also helps them understand that if I'm just writing 30 words, maybe that's too short to spark somebody's interest, and maybe I need to extend it. So these things aren't hard and fast rules. They're just suggestions. Let me toss another one of my 5 list things up here and see if it'll engender more. And those of you who are interested, pop in some questions about if you've ever had to write content and there are things that you're having difficulty with, good time to pop it in. If not, we'll have a short second hour, which is okay. We've had that happen occasionally. So my second piece of content suggestion is this one: not respecting your audience. And that is different than understanding it. Understanding the audience is trying to figure out who they are and what they need. But respecting them is a whole bunch of little things like respecting their time, crafting content as opposed to just throwing down all your thoughts. And how many of us have been in the situation where you ping to a website and you say, they're kind of promising me by saying, I'm going to show you how to do function A. And the first 2.5 minutes of the presentation on the website is, you need to click on this and you need to do that. And here's who I am. And here's why I'm doing this. And you're just not getting to the actual content. And I find that to be horribly disrespectful to the time that the people have given you to come to your website and read your content. So one of the things I was learning is to try to get to the point as quickly as possible. Not that I always do that. I still struggle with it every day, but it's one of the rules that I came up with. We have another question in. I'm going to try to go back and forth between questions and content here.
Sure. We have another one from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. He says, what techniques do you recommend to maintain engagement during a small 1 to 2 person live stream? For example, office hour kind of spoils this. So how can we keep engagement with only 1 to 2 people?
And my answer to that as an individual is to be extremely interested in those 1 to 2 people. I've done a lot of interviewing of people over the course of my career. I've been in a lot of situations where I need to get sound bites on camera. And one of the typical ways to do that is to set up an interview situation, and I become the interview sitting behind the camera, and I'm asking questions. And the most important part of that for me is my interest in drawing out good answers from the people across from me. So if I'm thinking about what I'm asking them next, because I will always prepare a list of questions, if that's where my focus is on what am I going to do next, as opposed to listening to what they are talking about and seeing if something they say engenders the next question that I'm going to ask, things go off the rails. Listening, you'd think that, my job is to ask questions, but really my job is to listen to their answers and figure out whether that answer is cohesive, whether it's a soundbite, whether I can draw them out farther, whether there's an emotional component to their answer. And if so, does it serve the purposes of what I need to get from them to make them look good? Does it serve the purpose to drill in on that emotional component? Or are they getting too emotional and I should back up and give them a little chance, a little breathing room after maybe they were talking about a difficult thing? That's part of the art of interviewing, which we'll probably have as part of the topic next Thursday. And we'll probably, maybe at some point, have a second hour on, because it's really difficult to do this process of interviewing people. Another thought here on my list, the next piece of the puzzle to me is burying the lead. This is an old newspaper term about writing newspaper stories. And the newspaper idea of passing out news, one aspect when I was studying that in journalism classes was the inverted pyramid of you put the most important stuff at the top of the article, and then you progressively get to less important or more detail-oriented things. And burying the lead is when you put the less important stuff at the top of your presentation or your article, and you put too much time between that and when you get to the really heart of it. And it's really been interesting for me as a writer, because I can't tell you the number of times in writing all those articles for publication that I would sit down to write. I used to go to a coffee shop and I would sit down and I go, here's my topic today. Let me just think about that. And at some point you go, let me just start writing. So I'd start writing. And I then, after that, I go get a cup of coffee after about maybe an hour of writing, and I'd come back and I'd say, let me see what I've written. I'd go back to the top. And the number of times the third paragraph was a better start than the first paragraph astounded me. And I think that is a perfect example of burying the lead. I don't know why I did it so much, but consistently, I think maybe those first two paragraphs were just kind of getting me going. But over and over again, I would dump the first two paragraphs of what I had written, and it would make a far stronger article. So in content creation, I think that's a kind of thing you need to look for. That's one of those little techniques or tricks that helped me, go back and whatever I wrote, is it in the right structural order? Am I really starting where I should start? Or have I added padding and fluff that really isn't necessary to get to the point? So that's something I've learned. We have another question here, Courtney?
Actually, Mitch is back.
Oh, Mitch is back. There you are. Mitch,
I'm willing to let Courtney do that, but sure, I'm happy to read it. Douglas Carmichael, how can music and sound effects help build and maintain engagement?
Harshit has a thought. Let him go first.
Yes, I think audio or music and that is really great to have, because for me, I'm vision impaired, so it gives you a sense of enthusiasm. There's one YouTube person that I watch, Doc Rock, and I could still hear his song on his intro. So I really feel that it's important to either have a sound, which is your tone. Timberland makes music, and I know what music he makes just from the type of beats he makes. Pharrell Williams makes beats, and same thing with his music. So, when you're engaging, even if it's a live stream or what have you, if you have a sound, you have a theme, you might be more significant or more memorable. And that is, I think, a part of a process that we all, we either, look at visuals, we do audio, we do different, we have different capacities of how we look at media. And I think audio is a good place, but overdoing audio is a bad thing too. So to be careful not to just, smash buttons on your Stream Deck and put a whole bunch of sound bits in there, because then it'll be fatiguing. So I think to be just ample, but can't think of the word, but be just with what your decision making is.
Yeah, I've run the same thing. When is too much, and when does the sound effect and music stuff take away from the clarity of the message? It's a constant struggle. Jason has thoughts about this whole topic.
So this to me has two very distinct kind of pathways. One is live, and I guess you could bifurcate that again between, live and you're the only person on the mic and you're the only person pushing the button, and then live where, Howard Stern or like, a daytime show actually has somebody who can just perfectly place sound effects or stingers. And then there's pre-produced things where when it comes to like, the NCIS is the incredibly formulaic TV kind of production. If you pay attention to the scoring, it will actually tell you the things that matter. Like I remember thinking very distinctly, I binge watched, I think it was a season of Bones or something. And I realized that like maybe 2 or 3 episodes in, I could tell the scenes that they were going to use for the previously on, for like the remainder of the season, purely based on the scoring. So it is one of those things that when done properly can completely transform a writing process if you're willing to think in terms of the audio.
Courtney.
I agree with what Jason said. It depends on the type of programming that you're talking about. If it's instructional programming or if it's a live show, you can get carried away with sound effects inappropriately.
Now, I thought Preto was going to do it first when we mentioned sound effects.
I was resisting the urge.
I know. So the fact that, Courtney, you beat him to it, props to you.
Okay, but if you're doing a heavily produced audio program where you have the time to finesse it and to build it, I mean, take for example the NPR either This American Life or Radio Lab, where they're telling a story and they set up a situation where they gather sounds from each of the different locations and they establish a whole feeling, and you get the natural sounds of the location mixed in, and then the narrator comes in and tells you what's happening and who's going where and what's speaking. And so they develop this entire audible narrative that is sweetened with sound effects and sometimes music, but usually natural music or found music that is appropriate for the locations that they're taking you to in their mind. Now, all this is produced in the studio, but all those sound effects are gathered on location by the individual producers and writers. So it comes together and forms a very interesting mind image if you're talking about radio production. Not used as much in audio-visual production because you have video to supplement and set the environment with. But on radio shows like that, good sound production and sound design can really help and maintain engagement because it takes you out of just listening to a radio program and into, listening to a story.
Can be a huge boost to your engagement. And Hershey's points, I think, were well taken. It really can set the mood. It brings in an emotional piece if you need that. Sometimes it's difficult. I'll talk about that in a second, but Mitchell's going to sneak in before.
I agree with Courtney. I think it needs to be used in the most appropriate way. If you go back to the old radio, they played off the theater of the mind. They had that huge canvas between your ears to play with, and the sound effects helped establish all kinds of scenes and situations. The idea of the morning show at the local radio station with drop-ins and sound effects and ha-has, that's so 80s. We just don't do that anymore in broadcasting. So I don't think it's appropriate to be using effects there, and the only music they should be playing is what they are as far as their format goes. But I'm also doing a great public service to this program by not having a soundboard, because I used to be an 80s and 90s disc jockey, and I loved those sound effects. So keeping them at way out of arm's length is considered to be a public service.
Cue the cymbal crash. Anyway, I agree with everything that's been said here. I will say also that sometimes background music or background sound effects is a simple problem solver. I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten a field recording back that I had to turn around for radio or as a bed for TV, and the noise floor is a little bit annoying, and it's really hard to cut it because, sometimes the background, and we call it walla occasionally, or walla sound behind something, is noticeable if you have to put edits in, and you can either spend all of your time trying to crossfade and make that sound even as a background, or you might be able to lay down a piece of background music, kind of like the bar pianist, and keep it relatively low, but it's just enough to hide some of that in the background. So I've seen programs that use music as a fixer. I will say that when I've tried to actually add music and effects and things like that as a piece, the creation of the program usually takes at least twice and sometimes 3 times as long. So I consider it, if you're going to do it, it should be as important to you as anything else. And the times that I feel like I've done it poorly are the times I said to myself, like in that former example, just slap something on to fix the problem. I never feel really satisfied about the work I do when I do that. Jason has some thoughts, and then Mitch will come back.
Yeah, that 15 years of live radio are like coming back to me slowly but surely. And I'm remembering that, talk beds were actually very useful to me to time a bit. So I did years ago a bit where I did a funeral for my sound card. And the talk bed was just, a pipe organ, just, doing long, slow, dulcet tones. But just simply watching the playback allowed me to pace what I wanted to say. And it allowed me the freedom of being able to go completely off book. Not that there was a book for the funeral of my sound card. I just kind of ranted and raved about exactly how it died. But the idea was, it doesn't really matter as long as, that last 30 seconds, you can wrap it on a 3-minute talk bed.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. That you were setting an emotional tone and maybe a comedic tone by bringing in that audio element, so it's perfectly in line with your goals for that. And when you can use music to enhance the artistic nature of your production, all well and good. Mitchell?
Yeah, I was talking about sound effects before and how they can be distracting. Let's talk a second about music and how it enhances a program. We have been taught and conditioned to respond to the music as setting the pace. When the villain comes in, the villainous music plays. When the scene is meant to be comedic, the comedy music plays. Those are things that I think are part of our culture and our expectations when we listen or watch a program. In doing many soundtracks for clients when they want music associated with it, there were like two basic categories that I would run into. If the music's there to support what's being said, if it's the right music, you can play it at a good volume because it supports and plays. So if somebody scored that, the music rises where it needs to and stays out of the way for the grocery list of items that comes in. If you don't have that, I generally run into problems with the client. They just want music, but they want it so very low that you might as well not even have it in there. So that's the dilemma that a mixer has is how loud can it be? It's as loud as it needs to be with the right music. And if it's just there to fill the space, then just keep it down low, and then you won't have the client yelling at you about it.
I agree with that. Let's do another question here before we go back to the list.
Another question from Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Engagement during training seems like it should be easy. It's not. Besides not reading from slides, what simple tips can we give people to make corporate or private teachings less dry?
Jason's going to start.
This all comes down to presentation, and I think the precursor to good presentation is an insanely innate comfort with your topic, such that you can entertain something as long as it doesn't detract from your core message. You need to be engaged with the people, but in order to be engaged with the people, the back of your head needs to be free in order to do that. And that all comes down to you need to truly be an interesting person and be comfortable with what you're there to accomplish.
Courtney?
You can insert some humor. Self-deprecating humor is legal. It won't be at anyone's expense other than your own. If you want to get off on I would avoid personal anecdotes. If you want to insert a personal anecdote into a training session, you can do it, but keep it shorter than 10 seconds. People don't want to hear, the story of how your mother took you in the car back in 1950 to a They don't want to hear a long story unless it's totally relevant to the subject matter, and keep it short to keep them engaged. If you go off on too long of a rant or a personal story, people become disengaged and tune out. They'll start looking at their phones.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the first two things I threw up on my bullet point guide. To me, this is the key for figuring out this part of things. If I understand my audience and if I respect my audience, I'm going to try to get the best content I can up top. I'm going to try to get it to them as clearly as I can. And then the other thing is that it really does change over the course of technology. And the reason I'm saying that is that it used to be that I constantly use the traditional teaching method of tell them what you're going to tell them and then tell them that and make it as strong as you can, and then go back and tell them what you just told them so that you get 3 reinforcement passes of critical information. The difference now is that almost everybody's consuming training content on some kind of a digital platform where if they miss something, they can go back and review it. So I find myself using less that traditional, this is a live presentation mode that does work when you're teaching in front of real people to do this repetition. But now I'm mindful of the fact that just like me, if I miss something on a TV show, I go back 30 seconds, a minute, or whatever, and revisit the content. And almost everybody can do that with the way the content is delivered now. So I can move a little quicker. I can move on and know that if the audience gets lost, they finally have a way to go back and catch up by revisiting. And that wasn't there in the early days when I was working on training programs. So that's a plus for me. Let's get to the 4th one of my little list here, just to see if it encourages even a few more questions. Oh, we have questions rolling in. The fourth one on my list here is over-familiarity and overconfidence. And what I mean by that basically is that I know what I'm telling them, but I'm not sure that they are getting that. I know all this material. And every time I've had a presentation that has gone wrong, I think it's one of those 2 factors that's messed me up. I haven't prepared as much because I think I've got this. I know this topic. I can speak on this for 2 hours. So you get in front of people and you start doing it, and suddenly you realize because of your lack of preparation, because of the overconfidence I brought to the circumstance, I'm not doing as good a job as I know I'm capable of. So keeping away from that, particularly as you do more and more of these, and trying to keep to the rules of what makes as good a presentation as you're capable of doing, and following those rules has helped me more times than I can tell you. Even if I'm talking about something and I know it really well, I try to sit down and truly go through and pare down the junk and get a crisper production. Do I fail? Constantly. But I'm always mindful of it, and I always try to do it, and it's really helped me elevate some of those last minute things. So watch out about being overconfident. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Clarifying my previous question, live streams where there is only one host who speaks, scans chats, reads questions and answers is much slower than office hours. Techniques and suggestions for how can I single producer can structure the live process?
And we have thoughts from Jason and John. Jason, go ahead.
Morgan, you hit the nail on the head. Structure is truly the name of the game here. The way that I did this for so very long was a fantastic number of monitors where I can simply glance, and you get into this kind of like home run with your eyes where you'll simply just start tracing around, and nothing for chat, nothing for this, nothing for that. And instant messages, for example, IRC, following all these things is absolutely doable if you can sort it into color codes and then just simply train your brain to be able to look at various things. Most of the radio that I did, of course, was just radio and not video. To this day, I don't understand why people enjoy a talking head of a radio show, but I enjoy doing it, and I find that it makes me a stronger presenter when I'm able to be able to do it in a way that doesn't seem or look awkward. Although it's always a little bit strange to have your eyes wandering around. People tend to be forgiving of that, assuming that when you want their attention, you're looking directly at them. So structure really, truly is the name of the game.
And John.
I just wanted to remind people that asynchronous consumption of media is the norm. And so I try to talk people out of doing live events. Here on office hours, our consumption is either 8 or 10 or 12 to 1 asynchronous on demand over live. And so most of your audience want to consume your content on demand and not live. And so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that's one of the things, I know in my Final Cut training things I'm doing, when I first did the first couple of them, I mistakenly thought, I can probably get through this if I just have an outline. And I have gone back and I've spent more time with it as I'm redoing it the second time. And I think it's helping as we go through. Mitch has some thoughts, and Courtney. Mitch, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the ways you can keep people engaged is to put a bird on your shoulder like John did. And I found that very engaging.
It's a very rarefied presentation style, but it's fabulous.
Yes, it works great. The other thing is, I wanted to kind of address the live thing, is that I'm a radio guy and I've been doing radio for a long time, but I also did video at the same time. And I think part of that live thing is to be in the moment when you're presenting. And right now I'm trying to be in the moment. I'm engaging the camera. I'm making the right eye contact, and I'm hopefully doing the right body language so that what I'm saying with my body language and my voice coincide. That's very important if you're doing live presentations. And if you're juggling a lot of other things at the same time, that's very hard to do all of those. You really need the support from people behind the scenes to make that happen. And that's why office hours is as good as it is, because we have support behind the scenes that makes that work.
Amen to that. Courtney.
As a live, interactive live stream show, make sure that you have enough material prepared to do it by yourself without any intervention or any interaction with people that would be, coming in over live chat or asking questions. So, and if nobody asks a question, it's a live show and you've scheduled it for a half-hour presentation, make sure you've got enough material to fill a half hour on your own without answering any questions. So, and if you are doing a live show and fielding answers and so on, make sure that you record it and edit it down, edit out some of the slow portions or the stuff where there's no questions coming in and you may not be prepared to go into the next topic yet or to expand on the topic that you're talking about for any length of time, and cut out the cruft so that when you post it as a streamable content for later consumption, people won't be faced by those long periods of watching you scroll through the comments and look for something to talk about.
Since I'm heavily engaged in that right now, I understand the number of that have snuck back into some of my presentations that I just, there's no reason for in something unless it's a jump cut problem or something. I mean, authenticity is one thing, but clarity of communication is a much higher order task. Jason, thoughts?
I had to bring something from below the line right up above. Extra Pirate Day points. This is from Chad Lafarge for Preto's Parrot. Like, absolutely.
Oh my God, I forgot it's Pirate Day. Oh my God, brilliant. John, I was completely unaware. You win. Do we have any kind of visual awards we can give the parrot? John doesn't need any more awards, but the parrot needs. Who is that, John?
Give me a cracker.
His name is Bird.
Bird? B-I-R-D?
Yes.
That's up there with the good ship Boat in terms of a
Bodie
great name.
McBoatface right there. Yeah, I love it.
He's a
need an
2-year-old
office
toddler.
We need an office hours eye patch for Pirate Day.
I was going to say, somebody's going to show up with an eye patch. Anyway, we digress, but a brilliant digression. Good. Happy Pirate Day to everybody. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's here. How do you draw the line between keeping viewers and listeners engaged and annoying them?
Jason's going to start us off.
Well, this all comes back to reading the room. Douglas, I think at one point you mentioned that you're on the spectrum, and I know that is kind of the defining point of what's difficult about being on the spectrum. I would say listen back to your engagement. If you have a way to record what you're doing, count the number of times you do something and see if there's a correlation between the engagement you're getting and if you're doing something too frequently. It's difficult to quantify this, especially if this is, a particular neurological issue for you. That said, there's no trick. Try to find a way to quantify it and see if that helps you improve. Mitchell's going to help us out here.
I had a client that in a building organization, and they wanted to bring the head of the building organization on to do a paid dinner and have them do the presentation. And it wasn't a very good presentation, or he wouldn't have made a very good presentation. So I said, why not take somebody that everybody would find interesting and engaging? And I had suggested Mike Rowe come in. And if you know Mike Rowe, he's the guy that did Dirty Jobs. He's a funny character, and he would be somebody that people would be like, that's Mike Rowe up there talking. That's one way you can have them engaged, by using a celebrity or somebody that's recognizable, but also a professional that knows how to engage people and knows just the right amount of seasoning to add to the conversation without going overboard.
And that's why some people get paid to do this kind of thing, because they're very, very good at it. And it is a skill. Courtney?
Yeah, you don't draw the line between engagement and annoyance. The audience draws that line. And so you don't know when you're becoming annoying. Most people don't. Unless you're watching the number of participants in a live stream, for example, or if you go back and look at the metrics of viewership in YouTube, and it can tell you how many people abandoned the viewing at a certain point, abandoned the playback at a certain point, and how many of it made it all the way to the end. And by looking at those metrics, or by watching the number of participants rise or fall, you can kind of gauge your amount of engagement to let you know when you've gone too far onto that personal anecdote and have wandered off the topic.
I'm laughing to myself because I remember years ago going into a classroom. My wife and I both asked to come and talk to an advertising class at the local university about what it takes to run an agency and stuff like that. And I just remember clear as day, we walked in and all the kids were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And about 20 minutes into it, I looked out again, and everybody was half asleep. And it's a clear reflection back in those days when we had a human audience of whether you are engaging or not. I think once they realized that there was no chance of jobs coming out of the two of us, and that we were just talking theory about things and how it works, all but maybe one or two of the kids just kind of tuned out. And the body language was really helpful. Here in the internet world, we don't have that. I mean, people can see the panel and see whether the panel is, otherwise engaged. And sometimes we're otherwise engaged because we have technical things we need to do in the background or something's coming up. But it is difficult. What you're asking about, Douglas, is a challenge when you don't have that feedback loop back there. So for me, the first thing I think of is, as long as I am truly thinking about what can I do to help the audience understand this? Even if I don't do it perfectly, I hope, and the feeling is that they will give me some slack because they understand that I am trying my best to do something for them, not just be up here because I think I'll look cool if I do it. If you're doing it for yourself, you're always in trouble. If you're focused on doing it for the audience, you're often less in trouble, and they'll give you a little more of a break. That's my 2 cents. Let's get to the next question.
All right, we're going to jump a little outside our engagement here. Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland asked, a quick note, just bought WLM loudness meter from Waves. How do I run it on the same way you guys do?
We've talked about that a number of days here because a lot of people who are coming to the show and haven't been around for a long time, we've been doing that since pretty close to the beginning of this, running an audio loudness meter in the panel view in Mukana, or the actual Zoom. When you see the panel view, you'll see our little WLM meter. Mitchell, you want to talk a little bit about how the process works?
Yeah, it's handy. I mean, every broadcast show that we do, we spend a little time in the beginning before we go on the air setting those levels up, and we literally have a checker that will come in and check those things, and we shoot for minus 24 on the WLM meter. If you're interested in how to set that up, Chad Lafarge has posted a helpful link from Hazmat Gajar, the gentleman who usually sponsors or brings it up, which will explain it in great detail so you know exactly what it means. But for the sake of argument or discussion, we shoot for minus 24. Everybody complies by reading a little bit, so we set their levels, and that's why we all sound consistently at the same volume.
Yeah, this goes back, if you want an even more basic thing, there's a term called gain staging in the audio world, and it talks about how you set up equipment along a production chain so that the gain is passed through properly, and it doesn't diminish or go get over modulated at any point. And so if you read a primer on gain staging, it'll help you learn the kind of overview of the process, but then go to Hasmuk's video and it'll tell you specifically how we do it in this internet era here on Office Hours. Let's move on to the next question. We have actually a few left here.
Douglas Carmichael asks, when sharing a creative process, music production, for example, on stream, how can I keep viewers engaged if the content itself isn't structured?
And Harshi's going to start us off here.
I think what you might try is when you're explaining, let's say, a metronome, or what is a metronome, explain something specific and draw to that idea, and then continue on with your music creations. If you're using different sounds, talk your way through what you're doing in your mind. That in its own process is going to build action. And when you build that action on, let's just say, hey, let's get a bass line in here. Okay, let's go to the bass thing, and then we'll alternate this sound and this sound. The movement of speaking, as you're speaking about, we'll do this, we'll do that, is going to engage your end user basically into wanting to know more about how you're getting something done, or what is this actionable event that's happening in front of you. So I think if you just explain one or two terms that might be technical, and then the rest give a play-by-play, you will more than likely hook and pull them with you.
Yeah, you use the term structured, and I think that's a brilliant term for explaining how to approach this. Almost all of us, when we do any kind of writing or creative process, we've learned a structure that helps us do that, and that's what, in part, Hershey was pointing out, and I agree wholeheartedly. Jason?
I would say start by asking the question for yourself, to yourself, why would somebody want to watch this? Just straight up start with this. What am I actually sharing? It's not my ego, or is it? Am I explaining something? Am I bringing them in and behind what I'm doing? Are they allowed to kind of just be a parrot on my shoulder, so to speak? And are they going to get something that is understood, or will they understand something better than they did before as the result of sharing my creative process? Andy Warhol tape recorded something like a decade of his life. Those are still in archives, and I'm pretty sure nobody's ever listened to all of it. So you got to understand, it comes down to what are you sharing and what do you expect, or what are you hoping your audience will get from that? Start there and then move out.
Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah, Hershey covered pretty much everything I was going to say. Is be descriptive, and if you're doing a creative process, explain what your goal is, what you're going for. I'm trying to get the sound of a really sharp, a high frequency sound that cuts through the rest of this, and then, as you're twiddling the knobs, comment on why you're turning a specific knob, what you're doing, and what you're trying to achieve. And that will keep the boredom down, other than just watching somebody turn knobs and listen to the sound change if you're talking about creating music on a synthesizer. So, describe where you want to go, and then describe your process of how you're getting there. And that way it becomes instructional, and it keeps the people engaged because they know where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing.
And I'm going to toss up my last number 5 of my script construction flaw ideas, what I've run into. And it is quite simply not fulfilling your audience promise. Whenever you're going to engage with anybody else in any kind of content, there's an implicit promise there. You said, I'm doing this because I want to help you learn X, or I have been asked about Y, and I'm going to try to address those questions. If you are fulfilling your audience promise, almost any process or technique or idiom you use to get that done is pretty fair. If you're not doing that, if you've made a promise, if you've said, come here and I'm going to get you 6 tips to making $1 million, and you just babble around and are trying to sell them books or something like that, you are not fulfilling the promise. You told them you were going to do A, and you're actually doing B or C or whatever. That's the quickest way to lose all credibility and make people think that you're going to do that again to them. You're going to waste their time again. I'm going to do this. No, I didn't. I'm not really doing that. I'm really trying to sell you widgets. Bad mojo, and it does not work well. Jason, you had a thought?
Yeah, Bill reminded me of a video I did years ago that's probably to date one of my favorites of all time. That was called How to Cancel DirecTV Correctly. This is an 18-minute video, okay? And it does fulfill the promise of the title, but that's not why the video had really good engagement. I think last time I checked, it's like 250,000 views. Somebody, like, truly, who would watch 18 minutes of me calling DirecTV? The answer is a lot of people, and it's not because it fulfilled the promise. It's because it fulfilled the promise and kept the engagement. So, yeah, it's true. You do need both things.
I 100% agree with that. If you keep these 5 things in mind, it's not do one of these and you will succeed. They're just areas that I have learned that I needed to improve on or brush up on over the course of my career. And the more the higher I ratcheted up all that thinking, the more success I think I was able to achieve with being a decent communicator. And it's because I paid attention. I asked myself, what am I doing wrong constantly? What can I improve on? Mitch, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, Jason, you're getting views because people can relate to the situation. You're promising a fulfillment of some kind. And as a DirecTV subscriber since 1994, now that I know that you have that, you're going to add one more name to the list of people watching.
Well, and part of this is timing, right? Are you producing content that people are interested in this era? We've had a lot of discussion about, there are probably people out there who are making really good programs and doing all these things very right. But for some reason, the market's just not there for that thing. I know Alex sometimes has issues with Malcolm Gladwell, but I do think some of his writing about I know in Outliers, he talked a lot about certain people who were studying one kind of law at one era, and it was just not an era where a lot of people wanted that. I think he was talking about mergers and acquisitions, and all the people in the white shoe law firms didn't care about that. And then suddenly the business landscape changed, and suddenly they were desperate to get people who were competent at mergers and acquisitions. So the market caught up with where their skill set was, and they became the champions because they were ready and they had put in their time learning that thing when it became ready. So sometimes that's one of the reasons that I keep saying to myself, if your content isn't ready right now, there's 2 things you can do. You can change and try to do something if you want immediate results, but you can also stick with it and see if the market develops toward where you're going. And today, if you can look down line and find trends that are happening, I mean, there's some out there that are pretty easy to find. If I was starting over, if I was beginning my career now, some of these technologies like Swift that's starting up, or Unreal Engine, or online presence and skills in anything from NDI to the stuff we talk about every day here, I would be all over this, because you can really see that downstream it has a lot of relevance to the future. And so I want to be gaining expertise every day now. And maybe that's why everybody is showing up here. I hope so. And I hope we're doing the best job we can and succeeding as much as we can in helping you navigate this. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. It's been said that running a line of patter, continuously talking, is an important tool in live streamers' toolbox. Do you agree or disagree?
Courtney?
Well, I only partially agree. I like to watch a lot of repair videos or troubleshooting videos of electronic equipment, and there's tons of YouTube channels on there of people that take vintage equipment and restore it, and that can be a long and tedious process, and they do it as a form of a live stream. And they're describing what they're doing as they go along, but sometimes they'll make a divergence and they'll start to tell a story, and I keep wanting to go, well, great, get back to finding the problem with the equipment and not telling me a story that's unrelated to the problem at hand. So as long as you keep it pertinent and on topic and descriptive of what you're doing and why you're doing it, then it's perfectly good practice to do. If you watch Ben Hecht or some of those people that do this kind of stream of consciousness building builds, and Adam from
Adam Savage
from Tested does several stream of consciousness live streams that he does, and he's great at keeping the pattern going and describing what he's doing, and without getting too far sidetracked, and keeps you really engaged.
Jason?
Yeah, I would say it's fine as long as it's done well. There's this semi-pro YouTube cadence that I'm going to do my best to kind of emulate, where anytime somebody has something to say, they sound both bored and condescending at the same time. And it becomes this very annoying thing because I find that they're trying to sound like somebody who's got something profound to say, but they're not actually saying very much, and they're certainly not pacing what they're saying with how interested you should be about it, and it drives me bonkers. So, yes, as long as it's done well.
I want to bookmark that. That was awesome, Jason. Thank you. For me, the thing is, are you trying to catch somebody in a stream, or are you trying to engage an audience who has come for a specific topic reason? I wholeheartedly agree with Courtney's observation that if somebody is giving me the information I'm here for, if I'm watching a wood turning demo because I want to learn how to do that, or if I'm watching somebody, take apart something, I don't really care about their pacing. As long as they are giving me a good view of what they're doing. If they say, well, let's take this off, and I spend the next 3 minutes watching them try to navigate with their Phillips screwdriver to that screw, and they shoot it well enough so I can see that, and I'm seeing how difficult it is, and they eventually get the screw out. If that takes 10 seconds to undo the screw, I'm still engaged because I've got things to think about, and I'm focused on the content, and it's working to inform me. On the other hand, in the click-away world we're in now, it's very much like when remote controls came to television. The television producers realized that you bore them with 10 seconds of no content, and they're going to go looking for something that's better content. And boy, in the swipe-through world that we've been talking about of YouTube and Facebook Live and all these things, how much time do you have to engage them? You've got, less than a second probably. So in those idioms, you have different, in those different areas, you have different amounts of time that people will give you slack. As long as you know that, you should be fine. And it's not that you always have to work the same way, but I do think you have to match your content pacing, engagement, consistency with what you're doing. Because most of us, if we click to a television show and somebody is just sitting there fiddling with their notes, we have a very short time frame that will allow that to happen before we move on. So both are there. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. You might find engagement in odd places, hence the Scottish gritters with names like, here we go, Spready Mercury and Gritney Spears. What unexpected ways have you sneaked in an emotional connection with an audience?
That's an interesting example. Knowing your audience, some people want their presenters to be a little cheeky or irreverent. And if that's the brand and that's what they're coming for, go for it. I mean, every community is different. Every community has different requirements. I've used the example before, and I'll do this really quickly, of I got hired once by a meatpacking company, and they had a very guy-oriented culture, and they wanted me to shoot like the thing knocking over the outhouse with the guy inside, and everybody thought that would be a huge thing. A more staid and respectable law firm would be the last kind of video they would ever do, but they worked in conjunction with their community. And so that's what I think when I see that, somebody's doing something edgy or whatever. If your audience respects that and wants to consume that and will come to you, and it's not hurting anybody, then you're doing the right thing for your audience. That same thing is a bad thing for a different audience. Let's move on. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael here, asking, when using humor in your engagement toolbox, how do you gauge what humor may annoy or offend your audience?
Mitch.
I'm probably a bad example of this because sometimes I have an extraordinarily bad taste for what's going to do exactly what you're suggesting there. The problem with humor is it's always at somebody's expense. Somebody's going to be upset, or somebody's going to be hurt, or somebody's going to have a problem with it. So the best humor you could possibly use is to engage self-deprecating humor, where you make yourself the brunt of the joke, or you make it turn around so that it points at you, because then nobody can really point a finger at you, say you went too far in one particular direction. But the problem is it's very subjective. Humor is subjective. I have found by experience here on office hours and after hours, where I wanted to do a humor hour, for example, that I immediately polarized people in their responses. And I think it was very funny, but apparently some people did not. So, Douglas, it's very slippery slope.
Yeah, I agree with that. Courtney?
Yeah, there are very many flavors of humor, and you don't know what flavor your audience prefers. Do they like dry humor? Do they like sarcastic humor? Do they like puns? Do they like observational humor? Now, that's a form of humor that, Seinfeld pulled off for many, many years, where it's not at someone's expense necessarily. He's just, observing the world around him and how it affects him. It's not necessarily self-deprecating, but observational. So that kind of humor can work, but that's why we stay away from topics like that are polarizing, like religion and politics, or even so much as platform preference as far as computing goes, because all those can be polarizing, and you don't want to alienate half of your audience with one particular comment.
Yeah, making fun rather than being part of it. Sometimes you just have to know where you sit in that. We've got one more question, and we're a little bit less than a minute. So, Douglas, take the next question.
Douglas is back. How do you make sure your content is flexible enough to adapt to platforms where you have to build engagement in a short period? TikTok, for example.
Jason, you want to handle this really quickly, and then we'll.
Yeah, I'm going to say flip that on its head. Understand where your content fits and how well it can fit into things where it belongs and where it doesn't belong. Not everything can be done in TikTok format, and not everything should be done in TikTok format. And similarly, not everything should be long form. So, yeah, you're asking it backwards.
And to finish up, I am hugely grateful. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for pulling me out of the fire on this one. I wasn't sure I was going to have to do it. Now, we weren't quite sure of the topic of this right before the show. And because of our fabulous panel people, we managed to get through another hour with a lot of things I found fascinating. So I hope the audience did as well. Thank those of you who watched today for watching. Tomorrow, we're back with another show, and the log of what the shows are going to be about just went up, I think, earlier today. I just saw it literally before the show starts. So let's dive into those topics as well. I'll be back on next Thursday, and we're going to do another piece, but a little more structural about the idea of writing scripts. So if you're interested in crafting content from the script writing point of view, join me on Thursday to do that, and we will have other shows in between. And thank you for visiting us at Office Hours. Let's roll the credits, and another one in the can. Thank you, one and all.
That was great.
Thank you all seriously for helping me through that.
Nice job, Bill.
People will recognize in retrospect how important that stuff that you just said was. I'm serious. Like, they'll get it.
Yeah, and it's going to be about where to shop for engagement rings.
I know Courtney had a whole thing prepared on precious versus semi-precious stones, and it's just crazy. Sorry about that, Courtney.
Cut, color, clarity, and who cares?
See you, bye.
Bye, all.
It's engaging.
And we're closing with a pun. Ouch.